So David has been the air quality manager for the 10 Southwest Idaho Counties since 2011, and he has been working for the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality since 1998. But from there, I'll go ahead and let Dave speak a little more about the work that he does and the interesting topic that he has to share with us today. Obviously, local air quality and the vehicle emissions testing has been creating a little bit of buzz for anyone in the area who's interested in air quality, and I really can't wait to learn more about this topic from Dave himself, the source himself. So Dave, I'll let you go ahead and take it from here, and I'll also, if you don't mind, as you get started, go ahead and announce whether you would prefer that people hold questions until the end, or if you're okay with them interrupting as you go. But yeah, Dave, take it away. And thanks for joining us.
All right, thank you. As Randy mentioned, my name is Dave Luft. I'm the air quality manager for the Boise region or Southwest region of the Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. And as far as questions, I prefer to just leave it open and have people ask questions as we go. Try to be more timely with getting information to people. Okay, so thank you everyone for your patience and my apologies. So I'm gonna just quickly go over what I'm going to be talking about, and the list is not all that long. I tend to ramble on a bit sometimes though, so any questions are appreciated at any time. So I'm going to start with talking a little bit about what is air pollution, just some high-level kind of definitions. And then I'm going to talk about DEQ's role, what we do as an agency to help protect air quality. Then I'm going to go over a couple of definitions of some different terms and phrases that I will be using throughout the presentation. Next, I will be talking about some of the two primary pollutants of concern that we have in the Treasure Valley at this time. I'm going to talk very briefly about the EPA review of National Ambient Air Quality Standards that is currently going on. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about the historical pollutants that we've had in the Treasure Valley, which then leads us into the vehicle emissions testing program and an update on what will be going on with that program. Okay, Randy, next, please. Wow. Okay, so air pollution, what is it? Can you click it again, please, Randy? This has some things, and click it again. Okay, air pollution can be any substance in the air that can cause harm to human health or welfare or the environment. So pretty broad definition of it. So what are the main sources of air pollution? Well, there's some things that most people will think of, and Randy, if you can click again, please. And what most people think of when they think of air pollution is big billowing stacks coming out from industry. Industry is a substantial source of air pollution in the valley. It is heavily regulated. There's a permitting program that regulates the emissions from industry. Go ahead and click, Randy. Another significant source that we've seen, and this one hits pretty close to home and quite recently, wildfires are a significant cause of air pollution. Most of the pollution that we get from wildfires is not generated in the valley. It usually is generated outside the valley and then drifts into us. But it is a significant source of air pollution. Go ahead, Randy. Dust from construction is another significant source of pollution. Dust can be from a lot of things other than just construction. Yard work can create dust. Vehicles driving down roads create dust. But construction is a significant source, and fugitive dust, fugitive emissions from projects are a significant source of pollution. Dust is normally a pollutant called PM10. It's particulate matter that's greater than 10 microns. And while dust is a concern, PM10 is one of those pollutants I'm going to be talking about as more of a historical pollutant. Go ahead, Randy. Campfires, another source of pollution. It's not as big as wildfire smoke, but when you get thousands of these little campfires going around in people's backyards, it does make a difference. Campfires are a source of air pollution. Go ahead, Randy. And our largest source of air pollution in the valley is exhaust from motor vehicles. So that's going to be what we talk about at the end of the program. Go ahead, Randy. Some things that people do at home that create air pollution. is, spray painting releases VOCs and sometimes some other toxics. Painting, campfires we already talked about. Lawn and garden equipment is significant sources of pollution. Even though they're small motors, they're not anywhere near as regulated as motor vehicles are. So they are a significant source of air pollution. California has estimated, and actually it was by 2020, they estimated in the past that by 2020, lawn and garden equipment would create as much emissions as motor vehicles in California, which I've seen some numbers where one of the gas-powered blowers, an older model of a gas-powered blower, creates the same amount of pollution as 25 pickups that are running as they should be running. So significant sources of pollution. And then again, motor vehicles, the largest source for us in the valley. So anything that people can do to reduce the use of motor vehicles helps protect air quality. Okay, Randy. Okay, so what does DEQ do to help protect air quality? We have a lot of different roles that we play. One of the things we do is we issue permits to businesses or industry. If businesses emit more than a certain amount of pollution into the air, they are required to have an air quality permit. The permits are actually permits to pollute, but they limit the amount of pollution that people are allowed to put into the air. We implement state and federal air quality rules. Basically, we have most of EPA's authorities given to us, so we sort of operate as the EPA in Idaho. We do have oversight from EPA, but we implement state and federal air quality rules. We run an air quality monitoring network around the state. Treasure Valley has a substantial number of air quality monitors that we are constantly measuring air quality. We do a lot of education of people, trying to help make people more aware of issues with air quality. On a daily basis, we forecast air quality. So we put out an air quality index forecast, trying to let people know what we expect the air quality to be for the next day, so people can plan accordingly, specifically, or especially if people are more susceptible to air pollution, if they have, cardiovascular type issues, asthma, COPD, things like that. We conduct inspections of businesses to make sure that they're complying with air quality rules and or permits that they have. We provide a lot of information to the public. We do webinars such as this. We do outreach events. We have a website that has a lot of different information available on it. We investigate air quality complaints. We'll get complaints of people doing illegal burning or complaints of fugitive dust from sites. We investigate all those complaints that we receive. We do work with burners. So farmers, there's a program in the state where farmers are allowed to burn their crop residue after they harvest. And we also work with land managers such as the Forest Service and Idaho Department of Lands. Burning can be a beneficial tool. So we work with burners to make sure that when they are using fire as a tool for land management, that it's done in a way that is mindful of air quality and tries to produce the least smoke and impact the fewest people. We also run a vehicle emissions testing program. Currently, we are running the program in Canyon County and in the City of Kuna. There's a different organization that runs the Ada County program. And another thing that we do is we enforce, and if we must, we fine people if they're not complying with air quality rules. That's kind of a broad overview of what the different roles that DEQ plays. Go ahead, Randy. Okay, so now some definitions. You'll hear me mention the NAAQS, or the National Ambient Air Quality Standards. The NAAQS are health-based standards for common pollutants. Those pollutants are called criteria pollutants. The NAAQS are put out by the EPA, and each individual NAAQS for a pollutant, so I'll just, as an example, PM 2.5 is fine particulate matter. The most common fine particulate matter, or PM 2.5, is smoke or aerosols. So every 5 years, the EPA does a review of the air quality standard for PM 2.5 to ensure that those standards are still protective of public health. So there are 7 different pollutants that are the criteria pollutants. PM 2.5, PM10, which is coarse particulate matter, which is generally dust. Another criteria pollutant is ozone, and ozone is, I'll talk about that in a little bit. Carbon monoxide, another criteria pollutant. The others are NOx and lead, and the ones that we have the most issues with here right now are PM 2.5 and ozone. Design value is a calculated number from monitoring data that compares the air quality status of an area relative to the NAAQS. So for each of the criteria pollutants, we have a design value. That design value you compare to the NAAQS, and that shows if you're complying with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards or not. Non-attainment, that's a term that is used if an area violates a National Ambient Air Quality Standard. You are then a non-attainment area, or you can be designated a non-attainment area by the EPA. Once you become a non-attainment area, there are a lot of requirements that an area has to do, implementing measures to reduce air pollution to where you again attain the standards. If you go non-attainment, it's a long, drawn-out process. You go through different steps, but the whole process to when the oversight ends is generally at least 30 years, sometimes even longer. After you have been designated as non-attainment, and then you work towards getting back to attaining the standards. Once you have attained those standards, then you become a maintenance area, and you are a maintenance area for at least 20 years where basically there's more oversight, and it means that you're still under the control measures, that the steps that you had to put in place to get the pollution down. You still have to implement those things, but you are currently meeting the standards. So that's the point that we're at right now for both carbon monoxide and PM10. We are what's considered a maintenance area. We are under a plan still, and still subject to be implementing a plan to keep air pollution down and air quality good, but we are attaining the standards. An exceptional event is an unusual or naturally occurring event that degrades air quality but is not reasonably controllable. So an exceptional event is something like wildfire smoke. So wildfire smoke, while it is real, it is a health hazard. When we are calculating our design value to see if we are attaining or violating the PM 2.5 standard, we can exclude days where we had high wildfire smoke. And that's basically so you cannot become non-attainment due to conditions that are outside of your control. So if you have an exceptional event, days when you have the severe wildfire smoke can be excluded. Go ahead, Randy. Okay, so we're going to dive into the individual pollutants now. First one I'm going to talk about is particulate matter, or PM 2.5. In the summertime, the largest source that we see of particulate matter is wildfire smoke. Other sources of smoke, fireplaces and open burning. Smoke is a health issue. PM 2.5 is a health issue. I didn't get all of that question, Randy.
I didn't hear it.
It was a message was posted.
Oh, let me see. I can't see our screen when I'm in presenter mode. So let's see. Is the Treasure Valley the area that you were talking about that is currently considered a maintenance area?
Actually, a good question. It is Ada County, so there are. And technically it's northern Ada County. When we became non-attainment, when you are designated as non-attainment, you have to propose an area that will be subject to those requirements. And that was back in the 80s, early 90s when that happened, and Canyon County was relatively unpopulated. There wasn't that much industry there. It was mostly agriculture. Most of the industry, most of the population was in Boise and in northern Ada County. So the non-attainment area and now the maintenance area is technically northern Ada County. But thank you, good question. So particulate matter, PM 2.5, wildfire smoke is the biggest issue, the biggest health issue that we have as far as PM 2.5 in the summertime. In the wintertime, when we get inversions, PM 2.5 is also a significant issue. The largest part of the issue is from secondary aerosols. So the little droplets of aerosols are formed by chemical reactions in the wintertime. And those chemical reactions are primarily NOx, which is another criteria pollutant that I'm going to be talking about a little bit, but NOx is primarily emitted by motor vehicles or any combustion engine. The largest source in the valley is motor vehicles. So NOx reacts with ammonia to form ammonium nitrate. SO2 reacts with ammonia to form ammonium sulfate. When we have severe wintertime inversions, those two secondary aerosols that are formed by the chemical reaction are the biggest portion of the PM 2.5 pollution that we have in the air. There's also some pollution from smoke, from fireplaces, etc. But the secondary aerosols are the biggest issue in the wintertime. So secondary aerosols, they affect the body just like smoke does. You can breathe those droplets in and they're harmful to your health, breathing those in. So PM 2.5 is a significant non-attainment concern for us. We are in attainment with the PM 2.5 standard right now, but due to the sources that we have with the secondary aerosols in the wintertime, if we get a severe inversion, we are susceptible to going non-attainment for PM 2.5. Next slide, please. Oh, and there was another question that popped up, Randy.
Let's see. Oh, it looks like someone posted a link, a New York Times article, so that'll be interesting for folks
Okay.
to check out if they'd like to. And if anyone does have a question, since I, as the moderator, am using my computer for presenter mode, please feel free to go ahead and speak up, and we can go ahead and get your question answered that way. And thanks everyone, of course, for your patience with that. We appreciate it.
Okay, so the graph you're looking at here is the design value. So that's the number that we compare to the standard for PM 2.5. So this is, there's a couple of different standards for PM 2.5. There's the one that is the most important for us here in the Treasure Valley is the 24-hour design value. So the 24-hour standard is just that. It's averaging hourly readings from a monitor over 24 hours of every given day. So right now you can see our design value is about a 22, and it's been hovering anywhere in the low 20s for most of the last 2 decades. We got up closer to 30 for a little while, and you'll see some outliers in 2013, 14, and 15. So what happened then is we had in 2013, we had the most severe inversion that we've had in, I was told, in 70 or 80 years. We had the standard for PM 2.5 is 35 micrograms per cubic meter. So it's a mass of PM 2.5 in a quantity of air, a meter of air. So we have monitors that are constantly measuring that. What happened in 2013 is we had the severe inversion. We were seeing readings for about 10 days that were approaching 100 micrograms. So they were about 3 times the standard. Now the PM 2.5 standard is based on how many times you exceed the standard in a given year, and then you average 3 years worth of data. So a really high reading or a series of really high readings will last for 3 years. That's why you see 3 years there. So while we technically violated the standard, and we could have potentially been designated as non-attainment due to that 2013 inversion, there are incredibly stringent QA/QC requirements and requirements for the operation of monitors. And we had an issue where QA/QC data was not kept by the lab that conducted the analysis from our monitors. And because of that, the monitoring data was not of a high enough quality to where the EPA designated us as non-attainment. We have confidence in that data. We could have been designated as non-attainment. There's also a caveat with non-attainment designations. The times when the EPA is required to designate areas as attainment or non-attainment is when they complete a National Ambient Air Quality Standard review. So whenever they finish that review, if they choose to make a standard more stringent at that time, then they request areas, or they'll designate areas as non-attainment. If they do not modify that standard, then they are not required to go through the process of making non-attainment designations. So they did not change. They reviewed the NAAQS standard at that time, but they did not change the NAAQS standard. So they did not ask for PM 2.5 designations. There was actually an intent to sue filed by some local organizations, and the EPA's response to those intent to sues was that the monitoring data was not of the high enough quality where they could dedicate us as a non-attainment area. It was a health hazard. There were 10 days where it was extremely bad. It does go to show that we risk we have the risk of going non-attainment if we see severe enough inversions in the future. But over the last, then after 3 years of that data counting towards our design value, it falls off, and you're always looking at the latest 3 years. So right now our 2021 design value is at 22 micrograms, and that is with exceptional event data excluded. So the days where we have huge amounts of smoke in the valley, those days are not included in these calculations. There was a lot on that. Does anyone have any questions on that? All right,
I have a question, Dave.
Okay, go ahead, Randy.
What is the threshold used to determine an exceptional event? Like at what point do you feel like you could qualify something as an exceptional event, or like apply for that to be designated as such through the EPA?
So we start flagging data. So if we have, and 2.5 is the easiest pollutant to talk about with an exceptional event, but if we start, the threshold would be where you get into the moderate category in the air quality index, which is about 12.5 micrograms. So it's far below the 35, but if we're up above that 12.5, then we're usually starting to see some smoke impacts if it's summertime. So we'll start flagging the data at that point. Now, to be granted an exceptional events, so this is data that we have flagged as exceptional events excluded, but we have not gone through the process of getting it excluded by the EPA. So the EPA will only review an exceptional event request if it has regulatory significance, which means it would make you be designated as non-attainment. So we gather all kinds of data. We have data on where the plumes from wildfire smokes are going. We keep information about all the local wildfires, and via the smoke models that are run and the satellite imagery, we can show where smoke plumes are, and we keep all that data in case we need to use it in the future to get data excluded for an exceptional event. So the bar to get the data excluded is fairly high. You can't just say we had smoke, so we can't count that day. We have to be able to prove that those high readings were caused by smoke. So we keep a lot of data, a lot of information on any days when we see elevated levels. Did that answer your question?
It did. Thank you.
Okay,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you. Okay, so there is also, go back one.
Sorry
please.
about that.
There is also an annual standard for PM 2.5, and that annual standard is just every hour over the course of a year, averaged out. And once again, you can exclude exceptional events data. That standard was 15 until 2011, and I'm sorry, in 2012, it was lowered to 12. It was 15 prior to that. This is, in our design value right now, we're at about a 7 or 8. So and that's every hour over the course of the year is how you calculate the annual design value. So as you can see over the past years, since 2013, when we had the exceptionally high days, which that counted towards data for 2013, 2014, 2015, we've seen a gradual decline in PM 2.5 readings over the course of the year. All right, go ahead, Randy. The next pollutant I'm going to talk about is ozone, and ozone is an issue mainly in the summertime. Ozone is formed by a chemical reaction between NOx and VOCs in sunlight. So usually it's a summertime pollutant. There are areas that have ozone issues in the winter. We do not. We are not required to monitor for ozone in the winter. We do monitor for ozone in the winter, but ozone is not a wintertime issue. And as I mentioned earlier, NOx, biggest source of NOx in the Treasure Valley is motor vehicles, and about half of the NOx that we get in the Treasure Valley is from on-road cars. Construction equipment, any off-road equipment, also the lawn and garden equipment, and some industry are sources of NOx. The chemical reaction, NOx and VOCs. VOCs can come from a lot of sources also, and actually the largest source of VOCs is vegetation. So if you can smell a plant, it's giving off biogenic VOCs, and those VOCs react with the NOx just like VOCs from evaporating from solvent use or from painting. Those VOCs react with NOx and can form ozone. So ozone is a big issue in the summertime. We're surrounded by sagebrush to the south of us and forests to the north. So we have a large amount of VOCs. And other than forest fires, the vegetation is going to continue. So ozone is a health issue. It is a non-attainment concern in the summertime. And ozone was the reason for 39116B being passed, which 39116B was the statute, or is the statute, that set up conditions where emissions testing could become required in different areas of the state. And it ended up triggering the beginning of the emissions testing program in Canyon County, which that started in 2010. And 39116B, the statute, was passed in 2008. And it basically, like I said, laid out the conditions when an emissions testing program would be mandated. And it was passed due to us flirting with the ozone standard. So the legislature took an action to try to prevent us from going non-attainment. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, in 2008 is when that statute was passed. You can see in 2008, we were right at the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for ozone. Our monitor readings and calculating out what our design value was, we were at a 75 point, I believe it was 4, and the National Ambient Air Quality Standard was written as 0.075, and since they did not put a decimal point beyond the 5, we were able to round down, so you don't look past the 5, and that is 75 parts per billion, which was the standard. The standard has since been lowered to 70 parts per billion, where we currently are. And as you can see with the line, we have steadily decreased. Our ozone design value has steadily gone down, but the NACs, the enforceable NACs by the EPA, have continued to decrease also, and their ozone is a pollutant that they're currently looking at, and we're being told that they probably will not make it more stringent again because it was just reduced in 2015, the standard was, but they are doing the review of it right now. But our ozone design value continues to go down, and the modeling that we've done anticipates that trend will continue. Go ahead, Randy. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Clean Air Act NAAQS review. So those are our current pollutants of concern in the Treasure Valley, PM 2.5 and ozone. If we are to have an issue, or when we do have issues, those are the pollutants that we're concerned about, that we regulate the most too. Those two pollutants are both under review right now by the EPA as part of their required 5-year review to determine if they are still protective of public health. So they look at them every 5 years. They're supposed to be looking at them every 5 years. The schedule keeps slipping, and they make sure that based on the latest science that they're still protective of public health. What we are hearing is that it was supposed to be this summer. It's gotten bumped now to this fall, that a proposed rule will come out for PM 2.5. What we're hearing is that annual standard, that was the one that was at 12.5. What we're hearing is that might get lowered a little bit. So our design value was between 7 and 8. So we have quite a bit of cushion there. So we're really not concerned with the annual standard. The 24-hour standard is what we're concerned about. What we are hearing is that the 24 hours PM 2.5 standard will not be made more stringent. It will stay where it is at. So that proposed rule will come out sometime this fall. They're also looking at the ozone standard and reviewing it. And what we're hearing is that sometime late this winter, that we may hear a proposed rule. But with the PM 2.5 getting pushed back, I'm guessing the ozone proposed rule will get pushed back also. The expectation on ozone is that it will not be modified. They feel that there was no new science since, there's been new science, but nothing significant has come out since they lowered the standard from 75 to 70, and since 70 was determined to be protective at that time. There's not a lot of impetus to lower it, since the health studies are not showing anything different than they did at that time. So we're expecting the ozone standard to stay at 70. Go ahead, Randy. Okay, so historical pollutants. The pollutants that we've had problems with in the past are PM10, which is coarse particulate matter or dust, and carbon monoxide. And both of those, we violated air quality standards in the past and were designated as non-attainment areas. For both of those, we are now achieving the standard. We're meeting the standard and have been for decades. So we are in what is considered a maintenance area. We still have plans that are in place that have requirements in them to be implemented to help protect air quality. So when you go non-attainment in an area for a specific pollutant, you have to put a plan together to show how you're going to reduce that pollutant and come back into compliance with the air quality standards. Then once you come back into compliance with the standard, then you have to put together a plan to show how you're going to maintain those standards for the next 10 years. And then at the end of that 10 years, you have to do it again for another decade. So those plans are called maintenance plans, and we're currently operating under a maintenance plan for both PM10 and carbon monoxide. So in those plans, you put in control measures. Those control measures are hard and fast rules. They have to be enforceable on what you're going to do to reduce the pollutant. One of those control measures for carbon monoxide, when we violated the standard, was a motor vehicle emissions testing program in Ada County. So that is why the emissions testing program in Ada County started, was because we were non-attainment for carbon monoxide. So we do currently still monitor these pollutants, but we're far below the National Ambient Air Quality Standard for both of them. So we do not consider them pollutants of concern anymore. Carbon monoxide, the most significant things that occurred that helped us get back under the standard was the motor vehicle emissions testing program, and also the tighter motor vehicle emission standards mandated by the EPA when vehicles were manufactured. So the vehicles are continuing to be cleaner and cleaner. They give off less pollution. Go ahead, Randy. Okay, so this is where we're at for our last few years with carbon monoxide. The carbon monoxide standard is 9 parts per million. and you cannot exceed that standard more than one time a year. We have not had an exceedance of the standard in several decades. We did in 2017, we had a couple of days that were a little higher, but they were still well below the standard. Those actually were attributed to specific, we had a couple specific issues over the course of a couple of years. One time there was a vehicle that was non-operational, but it was still running. It was a truck. It was parked right underneath our intake for our carbon monoxide monitor. So we were basically getting, and we weren't getting ambient air. We were getting exhaust from a specific vehicle. And we had another time where this monitor, while it draws air from the outside, it was located in a storage unit in a parking garage, and the parking garage had a small sweeper that they used, and in the wintertime they were firing it up and idling it in the room that the monitor was in, and so it was creating a huge amount of carbon monoxide. We had a small leak in our intake tube, so it was pulling in not from ambient air but from the trapped air in this garage. Even with those, we've still maintained the standard. Over the last 4 years, our highest reading we've had for an 8-hour standard was 2 in 2018, and last couple of years we've been barely 1 part per million on our highest and our second highest. So we're well below the carbon monoxide standard. We actually petitioned the EPA, and a few months ago, I think a few months ago, we were given permission to stop operating this monitor. We run a different monitor at St. Luke's in Meridian, and when you compare the numbers across the two, they were reading the same numbers. So it was determined that we only needed to have 1 carbon monoxide monitor in the valley instead of 2 because our numbers were so low. But this is the one that was in downtown Boise, so it was showing the over the years, it was used to show compliance for the non-attainment and the maintenance area. So way below the standard now, and we expect to continue to stay there. Go ahead, Randy. Okay, I actually didn't go into PM 2.5. PM 2.5 is really only an issue if we have significant dust. The events now that cause significant dust are events that we can get excluded due to exceptional event. And in fact, the events that happened back in the 80s, with the technology that we have now, our modeling group has said that they think that if we had the technology now in the 80s, if we had the technology that we have now in the 80s, we would have been able to exclude the things that made us become a non-attainment area due to exceptional event, because they were due to big dust storms that originated out of the area, and it created enough dust, kind of a haboob type situation where we had huge dust storms that caused our non-attainment. So anyway, that's why I did not go into PM10. We're well below the National Ambient Air Quality Standards for PM10 also. So the Ada County IM program, I'm going to start diving into what's going on with IM now. The Ada County IM program was initiated in the 1980s due to non-attainment with the carbon monoxide standard. So at that time, the plan was put together to get back, I'm sorry, what is IM? IM is a vehicle inspection and maintenance program. So it is the emissions testing program. The fact of the matter is that with most newer vehicles, we don't actually test their emissions. We're talking to the computer to see if the vehicle is operating as it was intended. And we don't actually, on vehicles 1996 or newer, we don't actually, for most vehicles, we don't measure the pollution that's coming out of the vehicle. We're just making sure the vehicle runs how it's supposed to. So an emissions testing program is not terribly accurate. So inspection and maintenance program is the more technical term for it. So thank you, good question. So in Ada County, when the plan was put together on how they were going to get back into attainment with the carbon monoxide standard, one of the main control measures that was put in place was the emissions testing program in Ada County. And that was implemented by the passing of local ordinance, which mandated the emissions testing. And those ordinances that each of the cities and the county had created the Air Quality Board to implement the program. So since the 80s, the Ada County program has been implemented by the Air Quality Board. That plan that the ordinances were put into was presented to the EPA as part of the plan to get back into attainment. The EPA approved that plan, and when they approved that plan and those control measures, that made those local ordinances federally enforceable. So the cities and the county in Ada County were federally mandated to continue operating that program. So control measures, once they're put into an approved plan, they must continue until a demonstration is completed that shows the control measure is no longer needed to meet the NAAQS. So with something like emissions testing, it has to continue until a demonstration is done that says we don't need it anymore to meet the air quality standards. So even when a maintenance, I said earlier that a maintenance plan expires after 10 years, and then you have to do a second maintenance plan, and that sunsets after 10 years. Those control measures need to continue on. There's something else in the Clean Air Act called a maintenance of effort, that once you start doing something, you basically have to continue to do it until you prove to the EPA that it's not needed anymore. So even with the sunsetting of the program, the control measure of the Ada County emissions testing program will have to continue until that demonstration is made to the EPA that it is no longer needed. Go ahead with the next slide, and I'm going to come back to that demonstration. The Canyon County program came to be later on, and it came to be because of the tightening of the ozone standards. The Treasure Valley was at risk of violating the air quality standard for ozone. So at that time, through an act of the governor and then through the legislature, there was a Treasure Valley Air Quality Council formed, and they were tasked with creating a plan for the Treasure Valley on how to prevent ozone non-attainment. So they created a plan for the Treasure Valley, and that plan recommended expansion of the IM program, amongst several other things. So that plan went to the legislature and eventually resulted in the legislature passing 39116B, which was the legislation that ultimately required an IM program be implemented in Canyon County. That legislation was passed in 2008. The legislation is not specific to Ada and Canyon County. It just lays out some triggers that have to be met, and once those triggers are met, then DEQ is required to look and see if an emissions testing program would help. And what those triggers are is you have to be above 80% of a national ambient air quality standard for a pollutant, and motor vehicles need to be one of the primary sources of that pollutant. So in the case with ozone, we were above 80% of the NAAQS, and motor vehicles are responsible, the primary emitter of NOx. So those two triggers were met in the Treasure Valley. So the emissions testing program was mandated in the Treasure Valley. Ada County already had the program. The elected officials in Ada County chose to continue running their program, and the Canyon County was also subject to those triggers. So there was required to be a Canyon County program. The elected officials in Canyon County tried to choose a different option other than an emissions testing program, and that was to implement some alternative measures to reduce NOx. They put together a plan, and they had some good things in it that they planned to do, but they did not reduce NOx enough to be equivalent to what the IM program was. Canyon County chose to not implement a program, so DEQ was then required to start implementing a program in Canyon County. And also, long story, but citizens of Kuna within the city limits of Kuna got lumped in with Canyon County. They were not originally included in the Ada County emissions testing program. So based on decisions of local government units, DEQ started implementing the IM program in Canyon County in 2010. Okay, next slide, Randy. Okay, so for vehicle emissions testing, there are 3 layers of requirements, as I just kind of covered. So there's the local ordinances that exist in Ada County. So each of the cities and the county have an ordinance that requires people to emission test, and those ordinances created the Air Quality Board that implements the program. Those were included in the plans to get back into attainment. So they were included in those plans that were submitted to the EPA. They were approved by the EPA, so now they are federally required. So there's a local ordinance, so they're required at a local level. There's the federal requirement to implement the Ada County program and the state statute, which was passed in 2008 to implement in Ada County and Canyon County. So Ada County vehicles are subject to all 3 of the requirements. They're subject to the state requirement, they're subject to the federal requirement, and they're subject to the local ordinances, the local requirements. Canyon County vehicles, because Canyon County was not included in the non-attainment area back in the 80s, it is not subject to the federal requirements, and there are not local ordinances that require that program. So the only thing that is making Canyon County and City of Kuna residence test now is that state requirement. Okay, Randy, go ahead. So the federal requirement still does exist. A couple years ago, the DEQ director directed staff at DEQ to look at what it would take to remove the federal mandate for emissions testing in Ada County. Idaho doesn't like being told what to do, so wanted to be able to determine for ourselves if emissions testing should be required or not. So that was the impetus to try to remove the federal requirement for emissions testing. So we have to submit a demonstration to the EPA that shows that it is no longer needed to maintain the NAAQS for any of the pollutants which would be affected. So we don't have to do it just for carbon monoxide. We also have to do it for ozone, NOx, and PM 2.5 because a motor vehicle emissions testing program can impact all of those. So we have been working on that demonstration. The modeling has been completed. A working draft has been submitted to the EPA, to Region 10. They commented back to us, and we're currently addressing those comments. We're expecting to submit it to the EPA in early 2023. So the maintenance plan sunsets at the tail end of this year. We cannot submit it to the EPA, or we could submit it prior to this plan sunsetting. But if we submit it prior to the plan sunsetting, then the emissions testing program would be moved to what's considered a contingency measure, which a contingency measure is a measure that is implemented if you violate a standard in the future. So it would still remain in the plan, but we wouldn't be having to implement it. We would rather just have it removed completely. And if we violate a standard, we'll figure out what is the best way to address it at that time. So we have to wait until that plan sunsets before we can submit it to the EPA. So it will have already had EPA review. And we're hoping for approval from the EPA in somewhere in the middle of 2023. Ideally, it would be prior to July 1, 2023, but we can't control the schedule of when the EPA will approve it. But once EPA does approve that demonstration, and like I said, the demonstration does show that without an emissions testing program, that we will not see an increased risk of violating any of the NAAQS. So once it's approved by the EPA, that demonstration, then the federal requirement for emissions testing in Ada County would be lifted. Go ahead, Randy. So a little bit about that submittal. So what it has to do is it has to demonstrate that the removal of the IM program will not impact NAAQS compliance. And it has to address all the relative criteria pollutants, which I just mentioned. And basically what our modeling has shown is that since 2015, the emissions from on-road motor vehicles has been steadily decreasing. And the modeling that we've done shows that that's expected to continue to decrease through at least 2024. So even with the increase of vehicles that we've had with all the people moving here, we're still seeing a net decrease of emissions from motor vehicles, and that is due more than anything to cleaner vehicles and the retiring of older vehicles. I mean, the reduction can be somewhat attributed to the motor vehicle emissions testing program. We still are removing pollutants by that, but the decrease is going to continue. It won't decrease quite as much or quite as fast as if we had continued to have the motor vehicle emissions testing program, but the trend will be for motor vehicle emissions to continue to decrease. Go ahead, Randy. So time frame, and I should have had this on the previous slide also. We're expecting the air board status. So once the federal requirement is removed, so the question is the air board status addressed in the demonstration? The air quality board status, no. What that is doing is it's just removing the federal mandate for those ordinances and the air quality board. The local ordinances at this point continue to exist. The city and county have some choices that they will be needing to make in the future. So I'm going to get to that in just a second and describe that a little bit more. So in October of 2020, we're expecting it in October, so coming up fairly soon, and it will be posted on the DEQ website, which is deq.idaho.gov. There will be a public comment period where the public can comment on the demonstration that we will be submitting to the EPA. And then we're expecting that in approximately January, we will be submitting that demonstration to the EPA, and then hoping around July 1 of 2023, so next summer, July 1, 39116B will be repealed, and that was done by the legislature at this last session. They put in legislation that will make 39116B go away on that date. So that will remove the state requirement for an IM program in Ada and Canyon County. So at that time, the Canyon County program, unless something changes between now and then, at that time, the Canyon County program will cease to exist, because they are only operated under the state requirement. Somewhere around that same time, we're expecting to get the EPA approval of our request to remove the federal requirement for the IM program in Ada County. So sometime about that same time, the federal requirement will go away. Once the EPA approval is granted, the Air Quality Board member agencies, which that's the cities within Ada County and Ada County, and the Air Quality Board is made up of a representative from each of the cities, and I think they're all city council people, and a member of the Ada County commissioners are on the Air Quality Board. The Air Quality Board member agencies will need to determine if they wish to continue testing based on their local ordinances. So once federal approval is received, and once the state requirement goes away, then it's strictly the local ordinances that are requiring emissions testing in Ada County, and that decision will be left up to, if we get approval from the EPA, which we're expecting. Once that has occurred, then it will be up to the cities and counties on whether they want to continue running emissions testing program under their local ordinances, or if they wish to repeal their local ordinances. Go ahead, Randy. The question was, can the Air Board pivot to begin addressing PM? So the legislation, not the ordinances that created the Air Quality Board, under the current ordinances, their sole purpose is to implement the emissions testing program in Ada County. So if those, I mean, that's a local decision by the cities and counties on if the Air Quality Board should have a continuing role and what that role should be, and they would need to address that through their own local ordinances. So that was really, I always try to end any presentation I give with some helpful hints on things that you can do to help reduce pollution. So Even though the emissions testing program, we're showing that it is no longer required to meet air quality standards, motor vehicles are still the largest source of pollution in the Treasure Valley that's created in the Treasure Valley. So not talking about wildfire smoke here, but so anything that you can do to reduce driving a motor vehicle or lessen the amount of time you spend driving a vehicle, all that helps. So anytime you can bike, if you can carpool, if you can use public transportation, if you can walk, all those things reduce motor vehicle miles traveled, which helps keep pollution out of the air. Things like, making sure you get all your errands done at the same time so you don't have to go back out. Anything to reduce vehicle miles traveled. Don't burn garbage. We still get complaints constantly of people burning garbage. Not only does it create a lot of air pollution, burning garbage is illegal. And anything you can do to reduce gas-powered garden tools helps with air pollution. While they're not a huge source, they are a source. So these are, like I said, just items of things people can do at home to help reduce air pollution. With that, I am out of things to talk about unless there are any additional questions.
Got a quick question. With the possibility of like the IM program going away, where do you see enforcement of like you mentioned like the vehicles getting cleaner over the years, and one thing that's been impressive is the technology on diesel fueled vehicles to decrease PM and NOx. In East Idaho, we see rampant modification of diesel vehicles where we don't have an IM program. What do you think? I guess I'm getting around the question. What do you think the effect will be for like illegal modifications on those types of vehicles in the affected counties?
So there are a lot of different ways that vehicles are modified. Some of it can be as easy as just plugging into your OBD port, plugging in a little computer chip, which can change how the vehicle is functioning. Those are very difficult. And I mean, if someone drives into an emissions testing station and has one of those in, all they have to do before they drive in is unplug it and drive in, and their vehicle's going to go back to the original configuration. So there are modified vehicles out there. The vehicles that aren't just chipped, but are removing pollution control equipment. Right now, there are currently no state rules that prohibit that. A lot of states do. There are federal requirements, or there are federal prohibitions on that. If you're removing an emission control device on a vehicle, you're breaking federal law. EPA generally does not go after individuals. What they're doing is they're going after the people that are buying or that are manufacturing and selling the equipment to modify vehicles. There have been a lot of cases and continue to be cases where some of the manufacturers of those chips are seeing multi-million-dollar fines and to large part getting put out of business. As far as the diesel truck that's rolling coal, the cities and counties have the authority to implement local ordinances that prevents that, or that makes that illegal. The only authority that that DEQ has over motor vehicles right now is the emissions testing program. So once that goes away, I have no authority whatsoever to regulate emissions from motor vehicles. The short answer is yes. I'm guessing in Ada and Canyon County, there will be some vehicles that will get modified or that will be re-registered that haven't been registered for quite a few years because they couldn't pass an emissions test, and they will be able to register now. So I think there will be some. Hopefully it's not that many.
No, thank you. Thanks for the response.
Sure.
There are a lot of interesting pieces to that. Thanks.
Yeah, hopefully that all made sense.
It did, yeah.
If there aren't, excuse me, if there aren't any other questions, go ahead and close out here. Thanks so much, everyone, for hanging tight through the beginning when we were kind of working through our technical difficulties, and then also staying with us here as we kind of creep past the 11 o'clock hour. But David, thanks so much for your presentation. I learned a
you.
ton. Found it really interesting. I've lived in Boise for a long time and kind of grew up with the vehicle emissions testing standards, but never really understood them until I kind of entered this professional realm. So it was really interesting to learn about the history of it and really what we're looking to in the future. I hope it's okay, David, but I'm going to perhaps offer that folks reach out to you or myself if they have any further questions, and we can do our best to get those questions answered.
No. Yes, I cut you off. There was one more slide that had all my contact information.
Oh, okay. Let me pull that up real quick and we can share it with folks.
Hi, Dave.
Oh, yep, there it is. Okay. I can also email out to the group David's contact info, but I'll just throw this up real quick so that people can see it and jot down.
Should be. Oh, it should have been. It was not on there. Okay, so my email address is david.luft, L-U-F as in friend T, @deq.idaho.gov.
Great, and I will email that out to this group too. I have the folks that RSVP'd on Eventbrite. I have their email addresses, and I can go ahead and email that out as well. So thanks so much, David. We really appreciate your time, and thank you to everyone who decided to join us today. And yeah, from there, I think have a great day and hope to see you all soon.